Georgia going to Texas. Texas favored by 3.5, 7:30 Eastern. DKR, ABC, assuming this is the Herbstreit and Fowler game. These are, in my opinion, right now, two of the top 4 best teams in college football. Whatever the rankings say, they say. But I'm telling you, I think Georgia, if you were to put them on the field with any team ahead of them, I'd be very curious to see what that line is. For Texas, man, if you win this game, what else are people going to say about you? And I mean that in more of a rhetorical sense, like what else can they say about you? Because look at the resume for Texas if they go out and beat what has been more or less the standard in college football over the course of the last 3 to 4 years. You beat Michigan at Michigan. Okay, check that box. Michigan, what are they really? I don't know, but you beat a team with a lot of NFL players on their defense and made it look pretty cake. All right, great. You have Georgia come to your place, and everyone's saying, well, Texas, are they ready for the SEC? Can they handle it? I know they beat Bama, but like that was a one-time thing. Can they beat Kirby and company? If they do that, what else are we saying about Georgia? Or what else are we saying about Texas in relation to how they would look against a good Georgia team? I think it's worth noting, and I think it's probably needs to be said that if Texas beats Georgia, I don't know who they're losing to the rest of the way. And the schedule isn't easy, but if you beat Georgia, I have no more reservations about what Texas is. Let's make that clear. College football sickos, we appreciate you for being subscribed right here to the On3 YouTube channel. This show, The Hard Count, is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy to play, easy to withdraw what you win. We have been dominating so far this college football season. Use code HARDCOUNT, $5 on lineups played. Win or lose, gets you $50 in promo funds. So again, we appreciate you. If you haven't yet subscribed, now is the time. If you haven't yet used that code, now is the time. Now back to the prediction. Now for Georgia, this is a chance, I think, for them to kind of set the record straight on who they are. Because I went into the year and I said, I think Georgia's the best team in college football. I think they still have the potential to be the best team in college football. They have not played anywhere near their potential. I think the folks in Athens, Georgia would tell you that. I think Kirby Smart would tell you that. If you go out and beat Texas at their place with everything that's being said about Texas to this point in the year, I think you clear the air and you let everybody know, hey, okay, listen, hey, I understand that, we looked a certain way against Bama. I understand we looked a certain way against Kentucky, but like, make no mistake, we are still the big dog in this sport. All right. I'm curious to see if Georgia beats Texas, where they would be in the polls. I doubt they'd be number 1, but I think they'd have a case to be number 1. I'm not so sure we wouldn't put them at number 1 in our own rankings. Again, I'm not saying we would, but I'm not saying that we know what to do exactly with the Dogs if they were to beat Texas. So what's going to determine this game? That's what we're here for, right? The matchup that I am watching most closely is Texas and their wide receivers against Georgia's DBs. Because Georgia's DBs, man, have not looked anything like we've come to expect that Georgia secondary to look like in the past, right? Just call a spade a spade. It's been disappointing. The Alabama game is evidence of that. The Mississippi State game is evidence of that. In both those situations, the opposing quarterback went for over 300 yards. Now, Mississippi State, you probably treat that evaluation with a grain of salt because Mississippi State is kind of an air raid-esque sort of team. But make no mistake, if Texas's wide receivers can do to Georgia what Alabama's wide receivers did, it's going to be a blowout. Okay? And maybe that's a little bit hyperbolic of me to say, but I think it could get that way. Because if Texas jumps on Georgia the way that Alabama jumped on Georgia, Sark's not letting up a 28-point lead. He's not. And that's not me throwing shade at DeBoer. I'm just telling you, Sark is too good of an offensive coordinator, and they are too good at adjusting. I think that defense is too good to where they will let you back up for air. So Isaiah Bond, as of right now, still waiting to see what he's listed on with that injury report. If he's able to go, that is a massive, massive variable for the Texas offense. He is their explosive threat. They got a lot of other guys that can burn a little bit, but like if Isaiah Bond can go, that changes the complexion of your offense if you don't have him at a elite level of play, if that makes sense. The other thing I think we should notice here, when it comes to what they have in that wide receiver room, obviously you're better if Isaiah Bond can go. We just established that. But what concerns me when I compare what Alabama has and what Texas has in terms of how they match up against Georgia, I think Texas, while they don't have like a Ryan Williams level player, Isaiah Bond's in that conversation, I suppose. Ryan Wingo's a stud. I'd be surprised, quite frankly, if someone went for in the range of 170 against this Georgia secondary. They have so much quantity when it comes to their playmakers. Like, I don't know who you give extra attention to. Is it Isaiah Bond? Is it Matthew Golden? Is it Wingo? Is it Bolden? Is it Gunnar Helm, the tight end? Like, I think there's so many guys that can hurt you to where if you're Georgia, they're a man coverage kind of football team. I don't know if that's the play this time. I don't. And I'm not telling you that I know more about defensive football than Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart, but I'm looking down the line here at what Georgia has done in man coverage against some of these football teams, and they've struggled. And so as much as we talk about the secondary for Georgia, the thing that I'm looking at here is, does Georgia find a way to disrupt Quinn Ewers? Because I think as much as we want to talk about the issues in the secondary, Georgia's got to find a way to get home here. And I'm not telling you they've had issues. I think Georgia's been pretty vanilla with the kind of pressures they've brought. Kirby Smart has said as much. But I think in this game, you got to find a way to get to Ewers. Because if you leave your secondary on an island in man coverage and you're not able to, play a certain level or certain caliber of pass defense, Quinn Ewers is going to pick you apart. He's too experienced. The receivers are too good. The offense is too dynamic. Sark is and will going to go after you. Make no mistake about it. That's who he is. That's what he's proven he will do. Georgia's got to find a way to disrupt Quinn Ewers. So in this game, we'll see where Mykel Williams is when it comes to his level of effectiveness in this game. And obviously we'll learn more about that as the week goes on. But that's something I'm a little bit concerned about here for Georgia. Because, and I don't mean to just harp on all the things that Georgia's concerned about here, but we'll get to them in a second. If Texas can connect on the jaw, if they can hit those deep shots early, because I expect them to have a similar game plan as they had against Michigan in this game, a lot of horizontal in the pass game and a lot of vertical in the pass game early. They're going to test that secondary. When that happens, as a defense, if they have success, you have to adjust. If I'm giving up, 10 or against Alabama, Georgia was allowing 11 yards of pass. If I'm giving up that number in the passing game, then my defense has to adjust. Essentially, I would have to give, I believe, extra resources to the pass game. So when that happens, well, then Steve Sarkisian can sit back and run the football. So all that's to say, I have a very difficult time piecing together a formula for Georgia defensively, short of something we haven't seen yet to this season, for them to be able to slow down this offense. Now, it's also worth noting for Quinn Ewers, he did not look great against Oklahoma. And Oklahoma's a good defense. I think personnel-wise, Georgia across the board is probably better. I don't know that you can be so, I don't want to say one-dimensional, but I don't think you can just lean on the run game exclusively and find a way to beat Georgia in this football game, if that makes sense. I think you do have to be multiple. So for Quinn Ewers now, you had the one game to calibrate, a little bit rusty from the time you missed. Got to be dialed in here. Biggest spot, the big dog in the SEC, more or less coming to your place. You got to find a way to not leave money on the table. We can't miss, over the middle on that crossing route and have it go to the safety. We can't miss Isaiah Bond when he's open downfield. It's got to be surgical, okay? If it is, good things happen. If not, Georgia, usually if you give them some margin, bad things happen for you, all right? We'll say that much. Now, I think that what Georgia is offensively, to this point in the year at least, they've been pretty straightforward about it. They are going to go as Carson Beck goes. And I think for all of us as the college football public, it's taken a second to totally understand or at least reimagine who Georgia is now, because even under Stetson Bennett, they were a football team that was pass to run, right? Even with him back at quarterback, they would throw the football downfield and then run the football. They have become even more so in that vein, I believe. They're throwing the football 56% of the time. 56% of the time. They're not necessarily a team that you worry about quite as much with pounding the rock. Now, can they still do that? I believe so. But with how they're dinged up on the offensive line, no Tate Ratledge, dinged up in the backfield, they are going to go even more so than they were before as Carson Beck goes. There is not a game that Georgia wins here if Carson Beck does not bring his A-plus game to the table. Now, if he does, all bets are off, because Carson Beck, I'll say this very clearly, he is good enough to win this football game for you. He is, right? He's special. There's a reason why the NFL scouts love that dude, okay? He is good enough to pick that Texas defense apart if he has time and if he's on. Because if he's on, man, like I said, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. But going back to what I was saying about the Georgia system, this is not like a Georgia, bully ball, move it up front, get the ball out to Brock Bowers. I think personnel-wise, on the perimeter, you have probably a higher level across the board of skill player. But I don't see that first-round draft pick in a Brock Bowers or an NFL kind of player that can take over like a Ladd McConkey. You need somebody to step up. Dominique Lovett, looking at you. Dylan Bell, looking at you. This is that game now where we need your best in the biggest spot to win this football game. So here's what I'm curious about. I just mentioned all the matchup things, and quite frankly, on paper, you got to feel pretty good if you're Texas. Defensively, I don't think you're at a deficiency. I think you're good enough on the defensive line. I think you're good enough to get after Beck. I think your receivers should win here. Like, you feel really good about a lot of the matchups if you're Texas. But here's what I'm curious about. Georgia has gone through, I believe, a little bit greater resistance test than Texas has to this point. And I'm not trying to downplay the Michigan win. I just think we've seen now as the year has progressed, Michigan offensively, like, they're on their third quarterback. If that doesn't tell us something, it should. It's very difficult, I think, to flip the switch to play at a certain level that you need to play at to beat Georgia. And Georgia, I think, has to be, to use a weightlifting metaphor here, they've stepped under that heavy bar. They've put the resistance on their back. They've had to play Alabama and gone back and forth and played to the fourth quarter. Like, Texas hasn't had that. And it's not any fault of Texas's, but I do think, like I just said, it's tough to ramp up the intensity in a spot like this and be able to fire on all cylinders and play at the level you need to play at to beat a team as talented as Georgia. We just saw it this past weekend in Ohio State, Oregon. Ohio State, on paper, probably was the better team than Oregon, but that wasn't the way it worked out on the field. Why? Oregon, 1, came into play. 2, they were there from the jump. And 3, I don't think that Ohio State not having to play 4 quarters, I think that impacted them. I think that hurt them. I don't think that did Ohio State any services. So in this game, what does it come down to? As much as I mentioned the matchups, I do think that these are 2 of the best coaches in the sport. It's not really a hot take. Anytime you have great coaches, they're going to do, I believe, a good job of taking away your fastball. To put it another way, I think they're going to force you to play left-handed. So what do you have in the bag if I take away your strength? For Kirby Smart, maybe that's taking away their pass game. For Steve Sarkisian, maybe that's finding a way to limit Georgia in the pass game. I think if that's the game that we end up seeing, I think Texas has more available to them. I think Steve Sarkisian and the way that he schemes up the offense is going to give Georgia problems. I think Georgia is still uber talented. I think they're one of the best teams in the country. However, I don't trust that secondary. I don't. I'd like to, but I think if Georgia wins this football game, it would take something defensively against one of the best pass games in the country that we have not seen to this point in the year. So for that reason, I think it's close. I think it's back and forth. I think Texas has more ways to win. I think they get it done in Austin. Final score, Texas 31, Georgia 27. I would not touch the spread. Based on that score, we have Texas winning and Texas covering.